Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Hello, today we have a show from the past shows all about course walks, and what seems to tie in well with walking the course is looking ahead. You'll get a few other things here and there, but a lot of these people are going to cover walking the course, how they walk the course, their thoughts, how many times they're going to walk it, and then a lot of it leads into, hey, are you looking ahead because you're walking too much or not enough? So take this all in and definitely come to the Facebook page and let us know what you do and what you might try to do different if you're going to change anything. So we have Brian Peters, Mark Scroggs, Mark Matarash, Tom Reynolds, Kim and David Whitener, Max Hayter, and James Yam. First up is Brian Peters.
Coming to the mental aspect of course walking, how much do you do it? What are you doing when you're walking the course? What are your thoughts pre-game and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Again, I'm not going to say there's any one right way to do it, but I am a very, very firm believer that the course walk is important. You really have to put together a good mental plan of what you want to do. And the walks, to me, I walk enough to where I basically have a step-by-step plan in terms of where I'll be looking and the when and the timing. Timing is really important too. So sometimes I'll walk, a lot. Sometimes I may only get a couple walks in. It just depends. But like you said, I'm not one to walk dozens of times because I think then you end up relying too much on almost just muscle memory instead of keeping that proactiveness to your approach. So for me, it's one or two casual walks at the bigger events, and then at least one or two, by myself, where I can focus and really try to put that movie together in my head.
Nice. So how many, are you picking out all the elements, or are you picking out 5 or 6 in an event?
Good. Yeah, good question. So really all I do is I walk for my exits. I'll basically make sure that I have visuals on every exit before I get to a breaking point for that feature. And the other thing that's very important is you don't just look at single cones. I'm always trying to pick up what I call like 1, 2, maybe the apex and then an exit gate cone. But I'm always trying to draw mental lines off the corners. So if I have an idea of the line I need off the corner, there's a much better chance that I'm going to execute the first 2/3 of the corner right, because ultimately I know what my exit needs to be as far as car direction to be able to set up for the following feature after that.
So you're seeing a mental line on the ground between the cones, between several cones to be key.
I wouldn't say a line on the ground, but I would say direction. So it's, if anything, a plane, vertical plane that I'm always trying to have the car oriented towards. But I really don't look at entrances. I don't think about car placement on entries. I don't think about braking zones. It's really just a simple matter of looking for my exits, which is going to consist of maybe the apex cone and then whatever cone or feature I need to connect a line coming off that.
Yep. Okay, and that's where I'm reminded of the Jeff Gordon book I read part of or all of. He said, we don't have speedometers in these cars. We look, and our butt tells us if we need to slow down or not. And basically, you're saying by looking over, you'll know when to brake. You'll know how much to brake because you're looking at the exit, which once again, is looking ahead and knowing where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other key thing, too, is to take advantage of the straights. You have not a lot, but there are opportunities on courses, I would say more so in the lower horsepower cars, perhaps, where you're not really doing much, right? And that's the time you need to get your head and your eyes up on a swivel and just look as far ahead as you can, scan up, back, take information in so the brain has a better picture at speed of what things look like.
Yeah, very good point. And even when I'm walking course, I turn my head, and I think I'm going to definitely try to understand what your approach is. But I look over and go 1 cone, 2 cone, 3 cones. Or I see how far I can look ahead to go, when I'm here, I should be looking there so I know, once again. And I keep on thinking about the Pro Solos in Lincoln, where you go down and you take a left or a right. And when it comes to that braking zone, I probably screw this up sometimes, but I'm always trying to find what are the next 2 cones over there that I really care to get into. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing on all your exits.
Yeah, and that would be more for the bigger turns. When you mentioned that 1, 2, 3, 4, that's really important. Let's say if you approach a transitional series, let's say it's a 3-cone offset wall or a 3-cone offset slalom, or a series of offset gates, you have to make sure that as you approach that, you pick up the entire sequence, right? So a quick scan all the way down, see the whole sequence or whatever it is, instead of only fixating on maybe the first 1 or 2 cones.
Yeah, and I probably don't do that as well as I should. That brings me to the thought of slaloms, not only looking at them but braking. Do you look down the whole line of slaloms? Is that what you're just saying?
Well, Junior here says he may fire me because, we're supposed to look all the way down to the end of the slalom, but I don't. Honestly, I'm looking 3, maybe 4 cones into a slalom. But to me, it's very important that, obviously you're backsiding the first cone, but you don't really don't look at the first cone, though, because it's too easy to spend too much time mentally making sure that you backside it, and then you're going to be behind for the rest of the slalom. But for me, it's gauging at least the first 3 cones, let's say, maybe 4 cones on a really long slalom, but then making sure that I'm getting to that exit of the slalom as quick as possible visually. To me, slaloms aren't really, we talked a lot about, segment times, which is important, but at the same time, slaloms are an opportunity to find an extra 80 feet, maybe 90 feet of acceleration over your competitor by not getting behind in the slalom. So you go in the first couple cones, you make small adjustments at the midpoint if you have to make sure you save your exit. And then if you're doing things right, you're rolling onto that gas, maybe before the second to last cone, right? Yep. And you just picked up a lot of throttle time over your competitors.
Yeah, I probably said that in so many videos. Same thing. It's like, although we'll get to a braking question in slaloms, but literally, as long as there's something fast after the slalom, you don't want to be getting further and further behind because then you can't accelerate out. So my goal is always, can I accelerate out of this thing?
Perfect.
2 or 3 cones. However soon can I get on the gas to get out of this thing? Even if I get later and later, I just better not have that, oops, I got to touch the brakes or lift.
Exactly. I mean, most course designs are going to have a gap, right? They're going to have a turn, a gap, a slalom, a gap, a turn. Yep. And so there's going to be an opportunity to find more throttle there.
And now we have Mark Scroggs. You course walked in the beginning following fast people. You've obviously driven lots of cars. You've talked to people like Sam for help when it comes to setup. What else would you include in that? What else do you think? You said seat time at one point. What really helps you click and become faster?
Well, I will say, everybody always regarded me, locally out here for years, as one of the faster drivers. I mean, and the results kind of showed it. And, I've always felt very comfortable driving a car fast. And, but I never really thought too much as to why, until literally the last 4 or 5 years, probably. And a little bit in 2006, I will admit that was, those couple of events where, I had this car that was known to be, 18 horsepower down, that was heavier, et cetera, and I drove it, and I had the result, and taking nothing away from Andy because he was still struggling with the setup on a brand new car. He made some changes based on what my car was doing that helped him go faster. But, so I think just, there was a point in time, especially the last few years, where I realized that this level of confidence kind of came over me, and that, I don't know. I mean, I'm a humble guy. I mean, it's hard to talk about oneself in light of their successes, but there is something to say when you've had some successes and, you can land to that line and you have a fair level of confidence going into that to push the car a little harder, to try a different line, explore a little bit, take a step back when you're walking and look at it from a different angle, things like that I think have helped me develop. But one other thing that I think, anybody can do is, Sam will disagree with me on this, but I think too little emphasis gets put into the course walk sometimes. And I'm not saying go walk the course 100 times, but, walk the course by yourself early in the morning when you're fresh, especially. And this is like for a tour, for example, when you have the chance to walk it at night. But just really kind of picture yourself, with what's your game plan for that, and too often we're walking courses with our buddies or our co-drivers and we're talking about this next car that's going to get classed in that class, and you just walked past 3 corners and you forgot about it, you know. And so that is something I try to do all the time and really pay attention to, you know, my course walk at least once or twice. So, you know, I don't know, there's a few ideas, but I mean, as far as, people have asked, how do you do what you do? I don't know if I have the answer to that really. I mean, other than all the basics, you know, that anybody's going to tell you. I've always told people that I'm probably a better driver than I am an instructor, if that makes any sense. And I do a lot of instructing, but you know, there are people that I feel put into words better than I do sometimes, you know, that I'll defer to. But yeah, those are just a few things I think that have helped me.
Yeah, that's key. That I stopped walking courses a lot. I've told the story many times about Bob Tennell. And then after interviewing him, realizing how he pulled off a no walk and was the top guy for that day. The key is when I walk the course, I'm truly looking at the course, and then I'll stop either midway or once I get past it, I'll look back and make sure I know all, like, where am I going and what 2 or 3 things, if there's anything that stood out to me. But like you said, if you're out there just walking around talking, which so many people are, you may be getting nothing.
Well, and more to the point, it's not that you're getting nothing, it's you're getting the wrong information. If you're not paying attention to it as you're walking it, and in fact, I think ultimately, like what Bob did and what Sam sometimes does, and Sam walks it, but he'll walk it once and he's done.
Yeah.
You know, he's got the general layout and he's fine, right? So, and that works for some people. It doesn't really work for me, but I'm more picture memory, and that's the way I work. But photographically memorize things. But what I have found is that, and I'm guilty of it. You walk in course with a friend, especially the night of a national tour. You got a cold beverage in your hand, and you're shooting the what, and you're walking along, and you just went through a section, and you think in your mind, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what I'm going to do there. But you really kind of bypass it. Now you have the wrong information.
Yeah, or you're missing
your driving line.
I could see how if you did that, you would be missing that section in your mind, and it might surprise you when you get there.
It might surprise you when you get there. Now you just threw away one of your 3 runs.
Yeah.
And it's, we don't get enough looks at courses at a tour. Pros are a little different, obviously, but at a tour, you got to get one of those things in, and especially or at nationals, where you can cut it with a knife. It's the pressure's on, and in that case, I want to walk as many times as possible because I don't want that little gap to be missing. Now, one thing also too that I tend to do when I'm walking the course, and this might be, everybody's like, duh, but I'm visualizing the car, going through that section and what it's doing, how the suspension's compressing, the attitude of the car. I'm really playing the whole thing out in my mind as I'm walking it. And that's another thing that I think helps me. I've always been able to jump in anybody's car and go really fast, right? It doesn't matter what it is. And I mean, this year so far, I think I've driven 12 different cars or something crazy like that. I mean, just whether I'm instructing at an event or I'm helping somebody with setup. I mean, the latest one I've been helping a local kid here in Fresno set up his Evo for STU, and I think he's going to be a factor at nationals. I really do. He's really getting fast, and the car is just working awesome. But I first jumped into that car, and I hadn't been in an all-wheel drive turbo car, and probably since my Galant, And first time in it on pretty worn out tires. I was running for fun, but it would have been enough for indexing number 1, for the event. And so I think but I knew I was going to drive that car, and so I'm walking the course, and I'm thinking in my mind, okay, so all-wheel drive, what's it going to do? Well, it's different than my car, totally different, and so those are some of the things that I try to do to, just, visualize it. But but you're never going to memorize a course exactly the way a car is going to drive. It's not possible. So there is that part where you kind of have to remove that from the possibilities, because every time you get in the car and drive the course, there's going to be differences. You're going to carry more speed through an element you didn't think was possible, or vice versa. You're going to be like, oh, whoa, that was slow, you know, and then you have to be able to adjust. But I think, you know, clicking those two things together, you know, that memorization of the walk and that first run, I think, you know, that helps to minimize that gap if you have a good memorization of the course.
What's your habit or technique when you finish that first run or that second run? Do you stop? Do you sit there by yourself? Do you take mental notes?
More mental notes. Again, I'm very photographic, so I don't need to look at video half the time. I remember everything I did. I can usually tell you exactly, you know, this, that, and the other. And that's another thing I'll bring up. I want to mention that I'm sure other people have heard this long before I had, but at Nationals in 2014, which again, I was my first Nationals ever, and I'm sitting in the lead after day one. And we get into day two, and Trevor goes out on his third run, picks up a bunch of time, and I'm down by 80-something, you know, hundredths of a second. And I've got one run to go. And I'm pacing, you know, I'm kind of freaking out. And I mean, as you know, as would anybody, right? I mean, this is it, you know, and this is for all the marbles. And Chris Cox, you know, a good friend of mine out here on the West Coast, and you know, he's got 4 jackets and has driven multitudes of different cars, and so he's there with me, and he just kind of puts his hand on my shoulders and he said, "Dude, you got this." He said, "Look, quit trying to figure it all out. Pick 2 things you can do better. Do everything else the same, but just pick 2 things you can fix. If you fix 2 things, you win this thing." And that just helped me relax and go, okay, I don't need to go out there and click off the epic autocross run right now. I just need to find a 10th. And another very instrumental person in that whole thing was my buddy Andrew Pilata. And I had left my memory card in my computer back in the trailer, and for my camera. So I didn't get video on my first run. Well, he runs back to which are, you know, paddocks midway back, you know. He runs back there, gets my memory card for me, and brings it back to me. And this is the year he won STX, you know, and but it was on opposite days. And so he was hanging out with me there in the pits too, or in paddock. And so anyway, so I was able to video my second run. And I had the time to bring it up on my phone and just sit in my car with the windows up and watch my second run. And I picked 2 spots that I knew I was not carrying enough speed through, and I went out there and executed it, and you know, picked up time and won a national championship. And so that's something that I think people can use if they haven't heard it, and that is, don't try to get a 10th everywhere. You know, try to pick it off in chunks. You know, pick 2 places in a run you know you can fix. Do everything else the same, and you'll find time. And then, you know, chip away at it, kind of thing. So,
yeah. This is Mark Matarash. And that's what makes you guys fast. Once you don't have to think about how I'm going to execute this turn, you've done so many of them, you're just looking ahead probably.
Oh, yeah. And that's really the key, is, especially for the new people that start this, is if you can't, this is what I always tell everybody, you need to be able to walk the course, and then when you're done walking the course, you need to be able to sit down, close your eyes, and go through the course in your mind. And if you can't pick out all the key cones and key elements, because there's really only probably maybe 15 to 20 key cones on the whole course. All the rest of them are just visual BS. There's only a few that you really are driving around. All the other ones are just there as a guide. But you need to be able to drive in your mind that course. And if you can't pick out the elements in your mind, you don't know the course well enough, and you'll hesitate when you get to that point. So that's one of the things I always do, is I make sure I walk enough to where I can sit down afterwards, go through it in my mind, and drive it in my mind. And if I can drive it in my mind, then I know it.
And you already built in to look ahead. I used to think that, and at times it's still proven out. For me, if I would memorize too much, I'd almost not look ahead. And some people are like, if you get serious about this, you could be fast. I'm like, you don't get it. If I knew walking the course 8 times or memorizing it even more would make me faster, I guarantee you I would do that. So I think it was Chris Dorsey said something to me like, I'm saying, no, Chris, believe me, if I could sit there and do the David Fouth and close my eyes and know every single, like you're saying, 15 or 20, usually I pick out 2 or 3 things that seem odd, I would do it. At times I still challenge myself to try to do that just to see, I'm like, these people are doing something. Can I do that? Because frustratingly enough, I've left nationals on a day where my first run was fastest and faster than everybody. And I'm like, I just want to pull the hair out, just all of it going. So that's where every time you guys say that, I hope people can take something and at least try it and see if that helps them, and not just try it once and maybe try it event after event to see how they can gain something from that. So when you say you're picking out those 15 or 20, you're still, I guess, looking ahead in my mind, not just programming yourself.
Right. Basically, I want to know in my mind what the next element is before I get there so that I can set that corner up before I get to that element. Because, a lot of those corners lead into the elements. And if the corner radius incorrectly and you're not in the right spot, it can hurt, a particular element. And that's where it's really crucial to make sure you're in the right spot, is to know what's coming up next and make sure you're in that right spot. And if you can do that without even thinking about it, because you know exactly where you're going, I think that's what really helps make you fast, because you're not thinking about it. I know when I first started this sport, the car was ahead of me. I wasn't ahead of the car. And I remember my very first event, I could have swore I DNF'd the course. I don't even know how I got through the course, because it seemed like I was driving so fast that I couldn't even tell you where I went. But somehow I went through the course and I didn't DNF. And I was like, how in the heck did I do that? And, that's the one thing is, if you're driving like that, you're never going to be fast until you can be ahead of the car, thinking about what's coming up next, get the car in the right position. And that's one thing I notice, too, is when I get lazy, and I do that at local events sometimes because I've been doing it so long, and some days you just, you're not all there. And I'll go into an element, I'm late, and I'm like, that was stupid. I should have set up for that way back there. I was daydreaming or something, And so there's times where, at local events, you don't really concentrate like you probably should, because it's just a local event, And some days, you kind of wonder why you even bothered going out, because you're not learning anything and you're not testing anything, and so why did you bother?
Yeah. Usually it's an all-day event. When you said the approach of knowing the corners, what came to my mind is, let's say it's a 180. What comes after that is what you would, I guess, set up the exit of the 180 or the sweeper being tight, or let's say a little bit off of it, depending on what's after it. That totally clicked when you said that, and it's something, who was it said? Brian Peters. He said all he focuses on the turns are the exits. All he wants to do is look through the exit, and in my mind, he's saying what you're saying. He wants to know what's after that and make sure he's set up for it by planning for the exit. He said, I don't care about the entries. He goes, I really key in on the exits, because obviously if you get that right because you know what features next, you're nailing it as much as you can.
I agree. I think the exit's the most important. Entry, you can be off a little bit and adjust for it in the middle of the corner if you have to, if your car's set up well. But that exit's the most important thing. It doesn't matter where you enter the corner as long as you get the exit to where you need to be, because that gets you into the next element. And you can obviously screw up the entrance if you're way wide and you get into the marbles or something like that, or if you're way too tight that you can't get to your exit because now you're so tight you pushed out, so you missed your exit. Obviously, your entry it does matter at that point. But as long as your entry is close to where it needs to be, it's not that big a deal as long as you can get to where you need to be for that exit, and that's the most important, because you need to be on the gas as early as possible. Well, if you've got the exit lined up real early, you can get on the gas earlier.
Now it's Tom Reynolds' turn. Chatted a bit about you learning. When you started progressing, what do you give credit to?
the first beginning when there was light at the end of the tunnel is getting in the right car made a big difference. I mean, that's the thing you always tell local. They sometimes get very discouraged, and you say, well, you're in this car and you're in this class because you did this one mod, and so especially in a small region like us where everyone's indexed, you feel miserable. So you don't even know how good you could be if you were in the right car. So switching the Miata moved me up a bit, but it showed all the flaws I had. Driving too violently, not seeing the line, those types of things. But what I really give credit to in the beginning was Rich and Marshall Fletcher. They were married at the time, and they kind of took me under their wing when they found out in 2003 I wanted to go do my first nationals. They offered a co-drive, not knowing, we were driving a DSP spec Miata, so no ABS. My first time on Real Hoosiers, I'd been running the V700 Kumos back then,
Yep.
and the Victor Racers before that. So I didn't, the Hoosiers are very numb compared to those tires. And so basically, my goal was not to flat spot them, but to try and learn something. And they really focused on the visual side. It was the first time someone, told me walk the course, and after you finish a section, close your eyes and try and drive it. And if you can't, go walk it just that section again. And then when you get to the end of the course, do the same thing. Close your eyes, walk the course in your head, drive the course in your head. And if you can't do it, the sections where you have those blank spots, go back and walk it. And that approach, I got away from it for a little while when I stopped driving with them in 06. And then I discovered again when I got in the Z06 that things happened too fast starting in 07, 08. And so I went back to it, and I've been hanging on to it ever since because it's one of the few things I feel like I have a talent for is memorization. And I can really, really get the course down in just two walks. And so I'm one of those people that struggles at nationals because I don't know what to do with 18 walks. I don't think I want to do 18 walks. So I try and do the one with socially, one less socially, and then one where I really come up my game plan. And somewhere in there, I try and do one more with either Strano or Pilata because both of those guys, there's lots of great people to take and give you instruction of how to walk a course, like Junior and those people. But for me, Pilata and Sam speak my language, and they can tell me this is where you want to be. You want to aim for this cone, but hit the gas, and you'll never make there. They have a way of explaining a strategy that I can relate to, and I don't need translation. And in one walk, really gain something. And the last year's results, my best year was really because of that, because I had both of them, and it was hugely helpful.
I can relate to the course walks. The first time I went, I think was 2002, I guess, went to nationals, and people kept walking, so I kept walking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, what do I do? So I had the map, so I started counting all the steps between each feature and writing them down because I was like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, you took the kind of engineer approach I did. I must have walked the day one courses back in Topeka, right, where there wasn't as much of the landmarks as far as like corn and runway and all that. And so I walked and walked and walked, and so I thought I had that first course nailed. I didn't really because I was still learning how to visualize. But day two, I was screwed because even though I was trying to walk it, I was trying to cram in walks basically, after day one. I didn't really look at it, even though they told me to beforehand. And so even though I performed better on day two, I was reacting to the course. I was just more comfortable on concrete because that's the other disadvantage I have. I don't drive on concrete unless I go to Lincoln or back then Topeka. So, and that's a big change for guys like us that live in this area. There's both not high-speed courses and there's not concrete.
Oh, yeah, good point. So this advice you said, someone told you to walk both courses? What?
Yeah, and it's funny because I've heard it before, since, but the Fletchers back then said, okay, we're going to walk, the first course, day one course twice, but on that same day, we'll go ahead and walk the day two course at least once. So we've seen it. It has some familiarity to it. And they kind of said, well, when you do a walk, make sure you don't neglect that course because you don't want to put all this commitment into visualization of one and then basically not have the same level of mental preparation for day two. And I've kind of modified that over the years where I think someone else you had interviewed where they talked about don't overwalk it. And I've learned to do that because if I do too many of my focus walks, I feel like I'm then trying to run the memorization, and I'm bad about looking ahead. I'm one of those people that's always struggling with looking ahead. And so if I have too much confidence, I should say, in my memorization, then I'll notice in the video later my head isn't turning as much as it should.
I can second that. A big time second that. That and the other thing I found myself doing is saying, oh, I'm going to come here, I'm going to brake. Never, ever, ever probably am I going to tell myself to brake again. If I'm looking ahead, I'll realize if I need to brake or not.
Yeah, I used to actually have that plan. Thank God I've worked that out. It's taken me time uh, to stop thinking about where I'm going to. I just think I'm going to slow, and I know I need to slow somewhere before a gate. Um, but I don't ever say this is my breaking point. But I used to, and
Yeah.
that was a horrible idea. And that took a long time to unlearn.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here visualizing as we say this that I still might at times think, oh, I'm going to try to carry all the speed into the slalom or into some weird feature. Once again, if I'm looking ahead, I'll know what I should do. It solves so many things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, I always tell people, I do a lot of instructional walks for our local guys and gals, and I always try and tell them, look, the reason why we're looking ahead is because every time we take a run, we usually perform a feature better, which means we're going to get to the next feature sooner and faster. And we need to be looking ahead to feed our brain the data to tell us the new spot we need to start slowing down, because it's going to be earlier because we're going faster. And if you just go off memorization, that's when you burn yourself, because you used the old braking spot as your reference point, but it's not right. It's too late now.
Oh,
And you end up blowing out that feature.
it probably wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago I realized that. I would keep trying to brake later and later. Let's think, oh, I need a hero run. Okay, I'm going to accelerate just a little bit longer. No,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. It only hurts.
And that's the problem I have. I'm still working on that. So the biggest, breakthrough I had was probably about almost 3 years ago now. I'd done the Evo school, and there's only so much they can do with your driving in 2 days. But it then got reinforced the following spring at Spring Nats, where they had the Evo TNT, and I did it. And again, I got Strano and Plata in the car, and they both said the same thing. You brake way too late, and then so you're 100% braking. How are you going to turn, and how are you going to rotate the car? So you're asking the car to brake really hard way too late, so you're missing the apex, and the car won't turn because it's using all of its grip to slow down. And it just, the epiphany, I mean, I knew this, right? We've been told this a million times, but sometimes things don't click until your brain's ready to accept them. And apparently that was the year it needed. I was ready to listen.
That's interesting. Would you say they would tell you to straight line brake and not to trail brake, or straight line brake mostly and very little trail brake?
No, they're talking, it depends on the feature, but no, they're talking about being able to blend it, right? Because I was too much of a stab threshold brake, then get off the brakes and turn, instead of, true trail braking where you would brake earlier, less, while steering it in. So you're doing a little bit of turning and braking, and then eventually literally trailing off the brake pedal to maximize your turning G's, and then rolling onto the gas, right? To really have those three phases of the corner blending, instead of being so digital like I was. Brake, turn, go.
And we're going to hear from Kim and David Whitener here. I like the 2 tips he gives. David, I hear you say that you try to treat your local events just like the big events. You try to have the same exact respect and programming and same routine.
I mean, I would say that I try. I don't know that I'm always successful at it. But yeah, I mean, I try to walk the same amount, you know, and all that sort of stuff the same amount. It's gotten to the point we actually don't do many local events at all. So we do private practices with just ourselves and a few friends. So we're unlimited on seat time, and then we do 3 or 4 or 5 local events a year, and then about the same amount of national events. So it's a lot of times at local events, it's like people are like, we haven't seen you in a year. It's almost a little weirder than going to national events. I do try to do the same amount of course walks and things like that at a local event I would at nationals, and we always try to make sure we do data and stuff the same way. So
yeah, just so once again nothing's different. There's not extra pressure. Take us through what you guys think of, how many course walks you'll do, what you're picking out.
I mean, I would say it depends on how complex the course is, for starters. If it's a really simple course, maybe 2. I would generally don't do less than 2. If it's a very complicated course, Blytheville has had a few courses, for instance, that were down and back pro solos, so they were just an endless string of transitions. I remember years ago getting ripped to shreds by Tom O'Gorman, and I remember sitting there thinking, like, man, I don't have the course memorized. I've driven this course 12 times and I don't have it memorized. Like, this is why I'm losing. You know what I mean? Not, I mean, no disrespect to him. He's an amazing driver. It beat me many, many, many times. But it definitely not. I don't think you should have one number. So if the course is really complex, I try to walk it as many times until I have it memorized. As far as what I'm looking for, over the years when Andrew and I drove, we found, and Kim will probably back me up on this, we would argue a lot about car placement and stuff like that, and look at the data and find out, even though we both thought we were doing opposite stuff, we ended up doing the same thing. Or we ended up doing the opposite of what we were arguing, and then we did different things. Basically, I try not to spend a lot of time analyzing where exactly I'm going to put the car, and more just think through where I'm going to be looking. That's really mostly it these days, I would say.
Kim?
What would you say?
No, I agree with that. The only thing I disagree with is you say you used to argue with Andrew a lot. I think that's... I mean, you go on a course walk with Andrew and David, and you just stay silent and laugh at how they sound like an old married couple. But no, yeah. So, yeah, I don't really think about where the car, what I'm going to do. For me, I've tried to think more of how the car... I don't try to walk optimistically. So in that case, you know, if the car is going to, you know, push out wide naturally, because that's how the car, you know, is going to move, I try to walk in that same manner. I see a lot of people who walk optimistic lines, and then that in reality, that's not actually what ends up happening, and it could throw you off. So trying to walk how the car is actually going to move, and then also just really focused on where I'm going to look.
So one thing on that is I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I sat around and like plotted out, like, at X speed, my car can turn 5 feet to the left every 20 feet or something like that. I plotted it out for different speeds, and then I would walk along floor tiles, you know, like found some place with floor tiles, and I would try to walk that arc so I could sort of memorize it. And if you ever do this exercise, I think it's about 1 in 15 is a normal arc for a high-speed car. So every 15 feet forward, you go 1 foot to the left. And you can sort of find a place with floor tiles and do that. That is not turning very much compared to what you can turn by just normally walking. So I try to really pay attention to how much I'm turning. So I'm always trying to stay with that. But I try to teach this technique to lots of people, including Kim and Andrew and Jerry, and no one seems to be able to get it. They just roll their eyes as I do my weird walking technique. But I am glad to hear you say that you... optimistic, that's sort of my term, as in, like, I'll be doing my thing, trying to walk sort of with that 15-to-1 ratio, and I'll see people that'll walk past a cone and just suddenly turn 90 degrees to the left, and it's like the car could never do that. Like, I wish it could, but it can't. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Like I said, no one else ever seems to be able to explain this, understand my weird walking technique. So
no, that makes total sense to me. I haven't done that, but I point out to people, I'm like, you cannot go to a cone and turn like that unless you're going really, really slow. And most of the time I say you don't want to get there anyway. That's extra distance. So both of you, I can totally relate to that. And that's about the only thing I talk to people about when they're walking course and I don't know them. I'll be like, how can you do that? You just can't go to a point and turn. It's not like a rail that just turns. They don't have rails that turn anyway. But, well, actually in Minecraft. It would
be great.
Minecraft, they do that. That's going to be my new thing. So, I might make a shirt. In Minecraft, you can walk a course like that. So, no, I love the walking on I love the walking on tiles. I think you said a 15-to-1 ratio. So, based on the speed, once again, I'm a stickler on that. I walk right where I'm sitting. And in a Civic, I know when I put my arm out, the edge of the car is right there by my fingers. So I walk up to cones, I stick my arm out, and then I scoot over 6 inches. I'm like, wow, I could be so close to this.
Yeah. Oh, so 2 other things I could think of now that we're on the subject of walking. One is this is something Hollis taught me, is if you're having an argument, or when you're having an argument about where you should be, walk past what you're talking about and turn around and look at it in reverse. Because generally the arcs are going to be the same either direction. I mean, it's not going to be exactly the same, but generally the arc you're going to want to drive is going to be roughly the same. And a lot of times the optical illusion, whatever tricks the course designer put out there for you, don't work in reverse. So that would be one. The other one is, and this is one we use a lot, because like Kim said, we argue a lot about stuff, even when we shouldn't. It's stupid. But if we're having an argument as to whether, like if you're looking at a pointer cone and going, should I be near that or not? Ask yourself where you would drive if the cone was gone. if it wasn't there. Well, if you would drive right over where it used to be, then you need to be on top of it. But for some reason, a lot of times you'll sit around and think about it and go do that exercise and go like, well, if it wasn't there, I would still go to the left. Well, then you shouldn't be near it. So that one's a really easy, mental thing you can do that to figure that out. So
I like those points, and I haven't really thought about the cone not being there, but that's excellent. Sometimes I just look at the chalk lines, especially on the inside of a sweeper or a 180, and I tell people, you see that arc, how they drew straight cone to cone? Think about what degree that is, and then you have to smooth that out all the way around is one thing I definitely do to go, I can't drive like that. How would I arc that?
Yeah.
So where would you drive? I love that. And arguing, I come back to you guys talking about where the car is going to be. I don't think I so much know where the car is going to be. I attribute any of my skill to looking ahead. When I'm looking ahead, I seem to have it figured out. When I don't, it's not so pretty.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so that was the course walking. Some things people are pointing out and looking ahead, they pay attention more to the entry or the exit of, let's talk about sweepers. Do y'all have any specific thoughts when you come into a sweeper?
Not really. I mean, what's faster? I mean, do I have a quarter-mile straightaway leading into it or a quarter-mile straightaway leading out of it? So, obviously, I think the way I generally drive is I overslow on the entry and try to concentrate on the exit. But as far as if I'm walking in and analyzing it, then just where is there more benefit? You know what I mean? If you've got a big, long straightaway into a hairpin and then the finish line is right after that, then that would be a different scenario, I think.
Max is very much like me. He's not going to want to overwalk it.
I know Brian Peters, who can analyze all sorts of things in his head. I listened to his podcast. There's a lot of stuff going on in his head that's not going on in mine. And that's maybe why he wins all the time. I think the thing I've learned over the years is like when I'm walking course, especially at nationals, is I don't try to. When I first went, I used to walk it like 10 times, and it ended up made me too afraid of the cones. I was so afraid of hitting one that I'd drive too slowly, and so now I just walk it 3 times at the most, and maybe I'll watch someone's video if someone fast ran before me that I want to look at. This year that didn't. My co-driver, Catherine Tran, ran in ladies earlier, so I watched her videos before I ran. But she doesn't necessarily do the same lines that I wanted to do. So, but she gets a feel for the car and how it's handling, and I'll look at that and go from there. But I found I'm better off for me not walking too much because it makes me too wary of hitting something.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I just find that if I walk it too much, I think I know what I'm doing and I don't look ahead enough.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you end up sort of saying, I can only drive this fast through here.
Yep.
And then I find it's sometimes better off just barrel in there and look ahead and go, oh, okay, and just go by feel. I've learned my feel is better than my walking feel. So, I don't. I think I end up thinking too much as opposed to just driving.
And what is James Yom going to tell us he's best at?
That's one of the harder things about when you've become an experienced driver is you get ingrained in not ingrained, but you're so used to doing it one way that it's like the whole adage of it's trying to teach an old dog new tricks. It gets hard. The one thing that that Brian Peters beats into my head that I'm terrible with, Brian and Doug Rouse when they ride with me, is I am like the world's worst person at looking ahead on a course. I just, and part of that just comes from, I grew up on simulators, not so much driving like Gran Turismo, but I remember, I used to put like flight simulators and stuff on my computer, and yeah, you should be looking all around, but all you have is that tiny little like 15-inch screen in front, so that's your whole world there. And I guess I've just gotten so used to that and having to know what is around you memory-wise that I just don't look ahead. And then, that got even worse when, you started playing Gran Turismo or, other racing games. So I'm terrible at looking ahead. One thing I've actually started doing right after Nationals is I have this. So to compensate for my terrible lack of looking ahead, I walk the course a lot because I memorize sections, and I definitely do not preach to people that that's what you should do. But that's my crutch. And I get around that crutch of not looking ahead by memorizing. It's not the best way to do it, absolutely. So I'm starting to teach myself to look ahead. The problem, again, I'm becoming an older dog, is that so this last event, I walked once, and I started driving. And at the very first run, I am looking ahead like a champ. Doug Rouse, Brian Peters, they'd be proud. And then by run 2 and 3, I already know what's coming up ahead, so I already know what the braking zone is. And now I'm starting to not look ahead. And it's just, it's being part lazy, but it's just me going back to what I'm used to. I'm used to focusing on the braking zone because I know where I should brake. And so that's definitely one thing that I need to fix. Like as lucky as I am to have 3 championships, if I want to keep adding more like some of these other guys, I'm gonna have to improve and evolve as a driver, and hopefully this next year that'll be my focus to try to look ahead more to kind of gauge what I should do better, as the turns approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd love to point a camera at you to see how much you are not looking ahead. I wrote down the questions. Does he walk and memorize it? You have to if you're not looking ahead. But what's great is, let's say there's other people that just don't look ahead. You just gave them the key to how you won those championships and how you are fast. You know what's coming up even without looking to see it. You know what you have to do to get to the next element. I'm wondering if you look like partially like one section ahead or one cone, whereas I think some people that are new don't know to look ahead at all. So I think there's a big scale here of, yes, compared to Brian Peters or somebody who's looking all the way across in a 180, maybe you just kind of know what the 180 is. You've raced so much, you're like, oh, it's going to be about this speed, got my brake zone right.
Nope, that's exactly what it is. I mentally mapped. I have a pretty good sense of shapes, maps, orientation. So I map what in my brain. I map out how much of a turn this is going to be. Before I, when I walk and before I get to that part. So with that, I negotiate the course and I'm able to do it quickly. But again, probably not the best. One of the things it does make me do that, again, it's one of the things that I'm trying to not do, is I'm very choppy with the throttle. I should be much smoother. But when you're not 100% sure what's coming up ahead because you're not looking ahead, you just, you tend to be more digital with the throttle. So, again, always evolving, always evolving.
No, that's great to... The insight, once again, is so huge to know, hey, I can get better at this. I've got other people riding with me. In this case, you got Doug and Brian in the car telling you what to do. I think that's huge for everybody. I think even beginners or people who have been doing this a long time and kind of feel stuck. If they're not doing that, try something new. It's an experiment. Get somebody else in there. Get somebody to ride with you. Get someone to point. What I do with people that are new or somebody not looking ahead, my hand kind of gets in front of their face when we're going left and says, look over there. Because it's night and day when you can tell when somebody's helmet doesn't turn. You're like, whoa, this is a 180. How do you know where you're going? I wonder, as part of this, I will go to events, even nationals, sometimes I'll walk twice. And I kind of have the same thing you mentioned, how the first time I may look ahead, I am sometimes fastest, especially locally, not even walking a course. And it's bizarro to me that I can't stay focused enough that to keep looking ahead so I can keep getting faster. So I wonder if you should challenge yourself, although you still have to just look ahead. Don't walk the course. When I don't...
At all.
Yeah. When I don't know the course, I'm scared. And guess what? I look ahead. I look way ahead. because I'm like, what's really coming up? And I think I even like the adrenaline I get when I go up to the start line and I'm like, do I really know where the heck I'm going? And a lot of times it's like, well, I know kind of where the course is at. But I'll tell you, maybe something to experiment with. I think you and I both still want to look ahead all the time. But there's something about knowing the courses. Going, I kind of know where I'm going. And I wonder if that's part of the problem with these pro solos, where sometimes we don't improve like we are always expecting to on the last runs.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. You get into a funk, or maybe this set rhythm that you fall back on because you're not looking ahead anymore, and you're not improving because of that.
So you told us you struggle with looking ahead. What do you think you're best at?
Oh, what am I best at? That's a good question. I don't know that I would say. And again, this goes back to just like walking the course. Some people may only do it 2-3 times. At Nationals, I walked the course about 10 times. Not only did I walk the course 10 times, but obviously being a Thursday, Friday driver, there's availability of people putting their videos up on YouTube. I must have watched videos like 100 times. To the point where, I could probably close my eyes without ever driving the course and just completely replay the course. And the benefit to doing, I wouldn't say benefit, but it can be at times, is that one of the interesting things that I can do is I can throw down a really fast time on my first run. And, because a lot of people, like you said, they're driving 95% on that first run to be more cautious, right? As long as I'm pretty familiar with the car, I can go out there and I can throw down a fast time pretty quickly. I may have a little bit of an error here or there, and that's what gets me. That's what happened here at Nationals first day is first one was fast, but I clipped a cone that I didn't think I was going to clip. So that's, I guess, what I would say that I'm good at is the memorization thing that I told you I do allows me to kind of map out what the course looks like before I get there, so that I can take that turn pretty close to 100% on that first run.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also, share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.